This panel discussion is on family philanthropy, and the moderator is Doug Brown. And in case you don't know Doug, which would be impossible, I'm going to read a little information about Doug. So Doug Brown served 5 years as Dean of UNM's Anderson School of Management, which is comprised of 1,800 students in 4 degree programs. He's also director of the Bank of the Rio Grande, Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, and UNM Foundation. Previous positions include New Mexico State Treasurer, UNM Regent, Trustee of the Stanford University, CEO of Tuition Plan Consortium, CEO of Talbot Financial, CEO of ALBUQUERQUE Bank, ABQ Bank, and EVP of Wells Fargo. Recently, he's received recognition of Albuquerque's top CEO, became Dean Emeritus of the Anderson School of Management, served as interim CEO of First National Bank in Santa Fe, and awarded the 2015 Distinguished Leadership Award for New Mexico. Welcome, Doug, and his panel of experts.
Thank you, Betsy. Well, it's a particular honor to be, can you hear me back there, back row people? It's okay? All right, thank you. And Betsy, who has been associated with almost everything good in the local area, and thanks very much for the kind intro. Philanthropy, I think that, I know all of you are intimately involved in one kind of cause or another, but I think it's good for us to talk a little bit about it on a focused basis in general, because philanthropy truly is one of those things that helps define the United States of America. It's something that is brought to a height, to a level here that is just unknown in other parts of the world, and it benefits our society so greatly. But particularly, I think businesses in general and family business have a particular benefit from philanthropy and team building and estate planning and business succession of policies and practices. Well, today we have 3 experts in the field. Now, the usual definition of an expert is somebody who's just gotten off an airplane from somewhere else. But in this case, they didn't have to get off an airplane, because we have 3 people who are truly expert in their field and have even national reputations. First off, going from my left, your right, we have with us Vickie Wilcox, who is the founder and CEO of the Wilcox law firm, New Mexico native, but went off to George Washington for her poli-sci degree, where she graduated cum laude. I always love Alan Simpson's comment. He says, "I graduated, thank the laude." So went on to UNM Law and then got a master's in tax back at NYU, has many legal honors, including Tax Lawyer of the Year locally. Vickie's expertise includes tax, estate planning, probate, business planning, succession, guardianship, conservatorship, and charitable giving. She's also active in the community as a board member of many different things, but in particular the Anderson School of Management. Vickie Wilcox. Let's welcome Vickie. Then next to Vickie, we have another person all of you know probably, and that's Randy Royster. He was also a UNM law grad and practiced for several years with a Sheehan firm and with a Miller Stratford firm, then went into corporate law, where he worked with Loveless and Janes, and then for the last 11 years has been CEO of the Albuquerque Community Foundation. The Albuquerque Community Foundation employs a special place of importance in our community, because as Steve Maesta says, we just don't have a real corporate presence here in our community. We haven't accumulated the wealth that big corporate shareholdings and foundations and all that have happened. So together, collectively, we pool our money into the Community Foundation, and it's just an awfully important aspect of our society. And he's managed to quadruple the assets during the time that he's been here for our collective benefit. He's also been active in ever so many things, like president of the UNM alumni, and has been on the board of the National Community Foundation, counsel, and has just, he's a fountain of resources and experience for this field of philanthropy and giving. And then immediately my left is Keven Yearout, third generation family business CEO. And by the CEO, I love that Chief Emotional Officer thing. That was great. We're going to take that home with us. But his business is amazingly diverse. I mean, a $100 million business is nothing to sneeze over, but he's in construction, real estate, manufacturing, technology, and then a brand new venture, which I'm not sure you're ready to talk about, but it sounds promising. Each of these disciplines seems to feed into, incorporate, and help the other, like the technology that you brought into the construction business. He's very active in local and national organizations, particularly in construction practices. Also, he's headed up AED, the cancer charities. He's been on the governor's transition team, chair of NAOP, which is an enormous outfit for those of you who are active in that. He's won the Ethics in Business Award, and his company has won a Best Places to Work Award. So Keven and his family, I think in particular, can speak to us about the benefits of a family foundation, because the Yearout Family Foundation has been in existence a while, and I think we've got a lot to learn from that. So if we might start, we're each going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can contribute to the conversation, and then we want very much to open it up to you and get your input, your questions. And Vickie, may we start with you?
Okay, well, we're going to talk today about private foundations and donor-advised funds, and I think that Kevin's discussion of that is going to be very interesting because he's going to talk about a family that has both and how they chose to use each of those options and what the benefits and the disadvantages of each are. From my standpoint and a lot of clients, when you look at a donor advised fund and you compare the characteristics of the donor advised fund to a private foundation, almost across the board, the donor advised fund comes out as a better option for clients. The startup costs are lower, compliance costs are lower, the minimum distributions are much more favorable, it's more private. It works out as a very good vehicle for a lot of clients, with one big exception. Does anybody know what the exception is that really makes a private foundation stand out ahead of a donor advised fund? Any guesses? And I know some of you, so I'll call on you. Yes? Exactly, more control. The private foundation allows the family who's contributing and making the charitable donation to control how those funds will be invested, which can be very important for many clients, how the funds will be distributed, how the charities will be selected, and how long the foundation will continue. So for many families, it can be an intergenerational vehicle where the donor advised fund might not have the same flexibility. But absent that control issue, many people will opt for the donor advised fund because of the factors I mentioned earlier. It can be a better vehicle. That's what I was going to mention about the private foundation. Randy, are you going to talk a little bit more about?
Sure. Actually, Vickie just gave me the best plug and hit kind of the highlights that I was going to share with you about a donor-advised fund. You have something, hopefully, at your seat that looks like that, and that's a takeaway. And inside that, you'll find some important information about donor-advised funds. First of all, you should know donor-advised funds are just one endowment vehicle that's available at the Albuquerque Community Foundation. We have a number of different types of endowments for folks from being very involved with your philanthropic giving, which is donor-advised fund, down to actually saying, you know, this is the only charity that I'm interested in, or this is the only field of interest I ever want to be grant making in, or I want to do scholarships. There's many different types of endowment funds that are available to donors. But today we're here to talk about, in particular, donor advised. And on the right-hand side, when you open up your folder, you'll see a chart that we have prepared that will actually highlight some of those differences that you've already heard about from Vickie between a private family foundation and a donor-advised fund. What I will tell you is, if you're interested in a donor-advised fund, it's a very simple process. We can have them established generally within 24 hours. They are 2 to 3 pages long. If you had ever seen one years ago from us, you might have seen a much longer document, but as an attorney, I think less is better. And so the agreements really are probably 99% in place in terms of they are provisions that are required by the Internal Revenue Service. About the only thing that you have to make a decision on is the name of your fund, the purpose, if you have anything in particular with the fund, and then successor advisors. So as Vickie said, generally a private foundation is going to give you more variety in terms of how long that family foundation might go on. Depending upon the size of a donor-advised fund, you get at least one successor advisor. So one generation minimum. And then depending upon the size of your fund, it can have multiple successor generation advisors. So there is some flexibility there. It's simple. You can start out with $25,000 and have a fully funded donor-advised fund. It's even more simple than that. We have what's called a grow-a fund. You can start building it over a period of 5 years. You can't be making grants on it till it's fully funded, but you could take 5 years to grow that. Then we have a third kind of donor-advised fund. It's called a now and forever fund. And it's because we realized a number of years ago that donors really enjoy being able to give while they're putting money away to be able to give forever, which is what an endowment fund does. So if you commit to build a fully funded fund over 5 years, we allow you to give away up to half of your deposit that goes in every year. So as a simple example, we have many donors who fund their endowment funds through their Alexis de Tocqueville gifts at the United Way of Central New Mexico. They often will designate $10,000 to come to the Albuquerque Community Foundation for their fund. And then during that year, they will grant up to $5,000 of that out. That might just be something that brings them some great satisfaction. Or if it's a family fund, as we're talking about today, it's an opportunity to begin to work with children or grandchildren, nieces and nephews, to show them how that fund is going to work in the future. So many people enjoy that now and forever fund. I'm not going to go over the details because it's all very plainly shown there, but you can see the various services that are provided by the community foundation with a donor-advised fund that you don't have to worry about depending upon the trustees of a family foundation to be taking care of or to be hiring outside contractors. We take care of all of that for you. I would direct you to look in particular at tax benefits, because if tax benefits is one of the major driving forces as to why you would have either a family foundation or a donor-advised fund, you will see that there's greater tax benefit for the donor-advised fund. Finally, what I would say to you is if you have a donor-advised fund, you have access to some pretty amazing professionals at the Albuquerque Community Foundation. Perhaps you're interested in giving to hunger. As an example, you might have been giving to the Roadrunner Food Bank for many, many years because they do an excellent job in collecting food that is available to pantries throughout our community. But you might want to expand your giving, and you're not really sure who else is out there dealing with hunger. You're also not really sure who's doing a really good job. Our staff can advise you on the different organizations that are doing good work in any field you might be interested in. And we can advise you to the very point of explaining to you how much of every dollar you give to that organization is actually going to go into that mission rather than being spent on operating costs. And you can probably imagine that if you didn't have that available to you, that would be something that you were going to have to determine how to get the expertise for your family foundation. So I'll end there because Kevin's going to tell you why he does both.
Well, good afternoon. So as businesses, as family-owned businesses, there's kind of three places that we go through as we grow as businesses. My grandparents started our business in 1963, and when they were running it, it was just about making payroll, paying your vendors, paying your rent, and hopefully paying yourself at the end of the day. And we've all been there. You all understand that. As my parents started running the business, my father became more successful, more stable. He was able to provide for more members of the family and able to be less concerned about the day-to-day activities that needed to be covered. And as my brother and I moved into the business and started running it, we started to be in a position where we were able to give back. And we thought it was really important to support the community that allowed us to grow to the size that we were and allowed us to be successful. So when my wife and I started thinking about what we wanted to do, not only as a family, but also as a business, on giving back to the community and providing a baseline for our family with regard to philanthropy, we looked at two options. We looked at the private foundation, and we looked at the donor advised fund at the community foundation. And we actually chose both, and we decided to start two funds. And for the exact reasons that both Vickie and Randy mentioned. On the private side, we wanted to have it for our own, have more control and be able to manage it better and be able to use it better as a family. But from the donor advised side, we wanted to make sure that we took advantage of all those things that the community foundation provided. And I will say one thing that we absolutely understood, and the reason we wanted to make sure we had one at the Albuquerque Community Foundation, is we understand what the role of the Community Foundation is. As Doug mentioned, we think the Community Foundation in Albuquerque is a fantastic vehicle for giving and for philanthropy, but we also saw it as a great resource for us to give through. So I'm going to introduce you to a word. Maybe you've heard it before. I certainly bet you don't use it every day. I use it a lot. It's called philanthrocapitalism. And we actually, as a family, are very business-oriented in the way we give. Now, that doesn't mean we give without emotion or without purpose or without feeling, but we really approach it from a business perspective. And I'll give you, just kind of tell you how we're set up. So I have 4 children. When we started our foundation 10 years ago, so we ranged in age from 8 to 20. And we set up exactly, we run our family foundation exactly like a company. You know, there's a board of directors, and each of the children is a board member. So we had an 8-year-old board member, which was fantastic, actually. We run it exactly like you would run a business meeting with motions and seconds and votes and a treasurer and a secretary and a chair is elected each year from each one of them. So by the time he became chair, he was a 12-year-old chair of the foundation. So what we did is we wanted to teach our kids about business at the same time we taught them about philanthropy. But when we were starting out, we really didn't understand how to vet the opportunities. And so through the relationship with the Community Foundation, we went ahead and started a donor advised fund, and I basically took advantage of the Community Foundation to say, these are our interests, these are the things that the family wants to give to, and by the way, there is a mission statement that we created within our family foundation. So we're very focused in the way we give. And I think that's really an important part of giving, is a focused giving where you can make an impact. And so the mission is, for us, is around at-risk youth, and we want to make sure that we give impact gifts to programs that affect the most youth that we can. And so what we went to the Community Foundation, and they gave us a whole list of opportunities and of people that fit within our field of interest that we were looking to provide for and give to. So what we did is, and we do this twice a year, we have set board meetings, and my wife and I are non-voting. We do have veto power, but we are non-voting. And I'll tell you a great story. My 8-year-old, the first year, he wanted to give to NBA Cares. If any of you know, that's a National Basketball Association fundraiser. And we said, no, we're local and we want to keep it local. And so we used our veto power in that one. But generally, the kids completely decide. And now they are 30, ranging from 30 to 18. So it's a much different dynamic. But so we bring in 3 to 4 charities, and they present to us. We have a nice dinner. We provide dinner for them at our home, and they present to us. And the kids ask questions. They understand what they want. They want to know how many people do you feed, or how many people do you touch, or how many families do you touch. And then after everybody is left, there is motions, and there is seconds, and there is discussions, and there is finally a decision on the way that the funds are dispersed. We fund this out of our own, out of the business, and also out of our own paychecks and things like that. And the other thing we did is we asked our children to ask each of their grandparents and uncles and aunts and whoever that instead of giving them presents on Christmas and Thanksgiving, that they actually give them a donation to the Family Foundation. So instead of getting a bunch of presents, they get donation, and they get to put their own money in to the foundation. It's a fantastic way to teach your kids about philanthropy and to teach them about business at the same time. There's actually a kind of unique thing that we did as well. So obviously, if you have kids, they get married, and your family grows. And you go from 4 to, we've gone till 6 now, because most of our daughters have gotten married. But it's interesting because they have to ask for the hand in marriage, and they have to get married, and they have to be accepted to the family. But the big vote is whether or not they get accepted to the Family Foundation on the board. And they have to go through a vote, and they have to be accepted. And we do that because we want them to understand it is important, though, what we do as a family in that regard. But we also went to the family, or to the Community Foundation, because of those advantages, because of being able to vet opportunities, being able to say where the best place to put our investment is. And so for those first several years, the Community Foundation actually brought to us those opportunities and those charities that met our specific values and our specific mission that we wanted to give to. Over the years, we've used that part of it less, because we now have a much better feel for the community and for the and so now the kids, we have a constant set of emails that says, hey, I just went to such and such a breakfast, and I really like this charity, and I want to put it on the agenda for the next Family Foundation meeting. So it's a year-round deal. And as a matter of fact, just last night, my teenage son says, hey, when are we supposed to have that meeting that we have every year? And I said, well, it's coming. We have it right around Thanksgiving time, when we're sure the kids are back from school. And so, but they start thinking about it. And so it is important for our family. It's a great time to get together. So I cannot think of a better way to teach your children about giving and about philanthropy than to run a family private foundation. It's been a great learning tool for us.
Right. Well, thank you, Kevin. Now, it's your turn. Do any of you have a family foundation that you've established, or a donor-advised fund? Anybody? Okay. Would you like to relate some experiences or ask any questions of the panelists. That thing looks like a bomb. I'm sorry.
Toss it to the next person speaking. That's how it's designed.
It's a microphone. I sit on our family foundation board. It's in the second generation of in the family. The first generation did not have the foundation. The second generation set up the foundation. We also have a scholarship fund within our company that gives scholarships to children of employees, but that's run by Scholarship America. We don't pick that. The Scholarship America runs that. And our company funds that. They fund our private foundation, our family foundation, and the scholarship fund. And I'm a vice president and secretary on our foundation board. And we meet twice a year. Our company is a manufacturing company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's not in New Mexico. I live in New Mexico. And it's been an amazing thing for our family. I've grown up knowing about the foundation, and to get on the foundation, you have to be elected by other family members. There are no term limits, but if you want to step down or someone wants you to step down, that's a family decision.
So I'd like to ask a question that I may be in this situation right now. All of our children live close to us, and we're all here. So having a spread out family, how do you decide what community
Right.
that you put the money into on a year-to-year or quarterly basis?
So we request grants, and we only do it in the two counties where we have our plants. We have a plant in Shawano County, which is a county outside of Green Bay, which is where our mill is. We are a paper-making company, so our mill is in Shawano. And then we have two other plants that distribute the paper. And so those are in Green Bay County, in Green Bay, so Brown County. So we only donate to those two counties where our businesses are. I fly to Green Bay twice a year for meetings, and that's an expense that I take myself. The company does not take that expense.
Great, very interesting. Yeah. The tax lawyer says it's deductible, so everybody do it.
There we go.
I would like to point out, I think it's kind of a myth buster about these foundations. You do not have to have a lot of money to do this. It is not something that you have to fund. I mean, we all think of family foundations, and we all think of Gates and Buffett and Rockefeller and those huge amounts of money. And the truth is, you don't have to have much at all. I mean, Randy mentioned $25,000 to start one at the community foundation. You can start your personal one for less than that if you want. And I think that one thing that you think about is, well, yeah, but what about the initial setup costs? And what about those costs? You are setting this up for generations. You're setting it up for decades. You know, the couple hundred or couple thousand up front to set this up, and the overall scheme of things becomes a non-issue when it's all said and done. So I do want to make sure that everybody completely understands that it's not a hundreds of thousands or millions dollar foundation you have to set up to start with.
I'd like to give you a couple of pieces of information based on your comments and Kevin's question, actually. If you do a scholarship fund at the Albuquerque Community Foundation, of course you would be funding it, and you can actually have members on the committee from your family that would be making the decision as the recipients of the scholarship fund. The law requires that the community foundation appoint the majority of the members of the committee. So typically we advise having a committee of 5 at least. So you would pick 2 that we would have absolutely no oversight of. But then what we do is we ask you to give us any additional names that you think would make sense to be on that scholarship committee. And we'll do some due diligence on those names to make sure that there's no collusion going on or something that the IRS would go after you for. And so in a sense, it's fairly easy to have the entire committee comprised of folks that you would be interested in anyway, or we can appoint them ourselves. The other thing is Keven brought up or asked the question, what do you do being spread out around the country? We have numerous funds at the Community Foundation that have been established here by a first generation, And maybe the first generation is still involved, or maybe they have passed, and the children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews are around the country. We have a few where they all come back into town, and so we convene a meeting, and ahead of time they say to us, here's what our focus is going to be, and could you have some things ready to present to us? But we have also done teleconferences and Skype, and so we've been able to have maybe the first generation that established it that's still in Albuquerque, and then have everybody join us. So there is a way that we can bring them all together to be actively involved in the process.
Thank you. Yes, question here?
Mine is for Kevin. It's more of a logistical question. As business owners, most of us are approached regularly by different charities for contributions. Some of them are tied into our business relationships, and I'm curious as to whether or not you funnel all your charitable requests through the foundation, or if there's some that you have to pull aside and deal with on an individual basis.
Yeah, we're all there, right? I will say this, both at the business level and at the family level, we have a pretty focused mission for each of our giving opportunities. So we are able to deflect a lot of those. We do keep an amount of money to give in that emotional giving. Not everything can be business or business related or looked at from a business perspective. There is some emotional things that need to happen. There are things that happen in the community. There are things that happen in the world that need attention immediately. But as a general rule, it does help to deflect a lot of those opportunities that we get on a day-to-day basis to say, you know, I really love your charity, I love your mission, I love your opportunity, but I just have to tell you our focus in our giving is on X. Yeah. And it does really help, and it is a way to, you know, to not downplay their charity, but to just let them know that that's not where your focus is.
A start point.
So did that answer your question, though? I'm sorry, Doug. Did that?
Definitely. What I was trying to get at is, it sounds like you do have discretionary funds, so you are making contributions to charities. Maybe they don't fit your mission, but you consider them critical for some reason or another. Yeah,
there'll be something that might happen in the community. You know, one I can think of right away is when the officer was killed in Rio Rancho, and there was a big a fundraiser for that. And you know, we have a lot of people that live in Rio Rancho, and there was a real feeling within our company to give to that. And so that was definitely outside of our mission, but it was certainly something that we felt like we needed to support. So you have to do that. And then we all have our business associates who, you know, buy a table, buy a golf team, buy a whole sponsor. You end up having to do some of that just because of your relationships in the community.
A start point, I've been on several corporate foundation boards. I think it's always the mission. There should be a clear mission for the foundation. And usually it most easily relates to what's the product or the nature of the business. If it's the paper business, maybe you have particular focus on the environment, and maybe you're not as interested in financial literacy or something. Or if you're a bank, maybe financial literacy or something like that is a major focus. One technique that's employed in family foundations sometimes is you make your general giving template, but then you say to each of the people serving, as a little perk, you get to give $10,000 to anything that you want to that's a 501c3. So you just get a choice to favor somebody. Maybe you particularly care about the Humane Society or something else, and that oftentimes gives everybody, so to speak, a voice in what's happening.
So maybe to just be a little more specific to your answer, though, I would say 90% of our giving happens within those mission statements of those foundations. And we try to keep a little bit extra outside of that.
Stacy.
A couple of quick questions, probably for Andy, but in particular, I'm curious, so are there any organizations you can help tie them to that have matching funds, and so there's another way to sort of expand your giving? I guess that sort of depends on where you're going to put it anyways, but are there generic organizations that do matching funds for, like, Broadway, New Mexico? And then the other question, I think you may have answered, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but what percent of revenues should you generally, as a rule of thumb, allocate for these kind of things? And is there sort of that out there? So 2 questions.
Well, I think there's a minimum of 5%, isn't there, Vickie?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a floor
For
anyways.
a private foundation.
For
Yeah.
private. And
Yes.
in a donor-advised fund, that's another bit of flexibility you get with a donor-advised fund. The law requires that a family foundation, even if the market has dropped and you've taken some pretty big hit on your investments, you must distribute 5% a year. The experts today would tell you since 2008 that it is very dangerous to be distributing 5% a year because you may not actually have that fund available in perpetuity if that is what you're hoping for. As Doug mentioned, I sit on the board of the Council of Foundations in Washington, and part of our lobbying is to get that changed for private foundations because I sit for all foundations, not just community. Community foundations, we have many times where a family said, gee, there's a new cancer center that's going to open and we'd like to give $50,000 to it. So for the next 3 years, we're not going to distribute anything from our donor advised fund because we're saving to do that. So you have much greater flexibility. As a rule of thumb, our investment committee and our independent third party consultant that works with us on our investments believes that if you're granting out between 3.5% and 4% today, and you're not adding anything into your fund, that your fund will proceed in perpetuity.
Can I add to that? I would keep an eye on that, though, because there's quite a bit of proposed legislation where donor advised funds would be required to have a minimum distribution. Because there's the theory, I think a false theory, but there's a theory that people are hoarding money inside donor advised funds and not distributing the assets. So some senators and congressmen are proposing to change that.
Part of my question on that was I'm helping a lot of students write business plans for new businesses, and I'm really trying to encourage them to build in something to give back to the community somewhere in there because it's part of their future too. Right? It's a double bottom line.
Well, I think you certainly have to budget. If you're a business, a family-owned business, I don't care what kind of business, and you know that you're going to be approached, and we all are, you literally budget giving. You budget charitable giving into your budget. And we do that both at the company level, but then within the family level, we put into our family foundation like we give to our 401k. It's just a percentage of what we have every week, basically.
One bit of caution about the composition of the family foundation. I have seen several times where a wealthy family sets up a family foundation, and they've got kind of a fragmented, unsuccessful family because they've just maybe plowed it all into the business, and the kids have gone hither and yon, and there's all kinds of fights and friction between them. And the old man often says, okay, we're going to form this family foundation, and we're going to get them all to come together, and every Thanksgiving they'll come together, and it'll kind of bring the family back together. Sometimes that just becomes a World War III, and it just aggravates some of the things that they're trying to solve by bringing. So you might want to make real sure that there's some reasonable foundation of relationship, and often that should have been through participation in the formation of the foundation in the first place, and not just drop down upon them. So, anybody had any experience of that sort to deal with? Don't know if you have. Anyway, it can get to be really something.
I have clients who embrace the private foundation for that reason. Even though there's friction among the children, mom and dad feel like this is one way that they can be certain that every year the children are going to get together and they're going to have to sit at the table and talk to each other. And so in this era in particular where people are worried about leaving too much for their children, they're looking at this as a vehicle to encourage philanthropy, and also, as Keven was describing, the educated philanthropy and the family-educated philanthropy. I think that's definitely a downside and an attractive option.
Yeah. Does anybody have a donor-advised fund that they'd like to Doc, George?
We have established our donor advised fund to dump all the money left when we're no longer in this room.
Yeah.
And then set up guidelines for it to be distributed in accordance with the family's tradition.
Got it. Excuse me, Brent, did you have something?
Yeah, a general question for Randy. You hear so many stories about foundations anymore, about dirty money, in regard to, I'm curious, what kind of due diligence do you go through in regard to the money coming in? Where is it coming from? And also, the other thing I wanted to ask you is about controlling administrative costs. You hear so many of these foundations are not really paying out that much for their mission or their cause, and there's just a lot of administrative expense. So I just thought I'd ask you about that in general.
Is Walter White your client?
Walter White is not our client, no. Even though some of you may remember that we did do a major fundraiser based around Walter's mock funeral to raise money for a donor advised fund for young people with addiction issues. To date, the Albuquerque Community Foundation has not had any assets attempted to be transferred to a donor advised fund that are not very obviously clean. There are procedures if someone was doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that the money wasn't laundered ahead of time before it came from, the local bank's checking account. I would say really one of the things that we're able to help folks with if they have an interest that is tough now because of some of those issues that you bring up is if you have a donor advised fund with us, you can give to charitable causes anywhere in the world. You're not limited to the greater Albuquerque metropolitan area. And our donors give all over this state, they give all over the country, and donors who currently are giving into India and Africa and Argentina. And if you want to do that on your own, that's a very difficult process because they're concerned about where is the money really going. But we have certification to be able to handle that for donors. So that was your first question. Your second question, I guess the only thing I hope this will answer your question, the fees that the Community Foundation charges for a donor advised fund up to $1 million is 1.5%. And it's going to be that much regardless of the activity level. So some donors get a real bargain because they're writing we're writing many checks and looking at many different organizations over the year for them. Others have less activity. And then once a fund goes over $1 million, those fees start dropping.
Another aspect of assets coming in is the Community Foundation is in a position to handle a number of specialized assets, oil and gas interests, or valuing small businesses, or other kinds of, real estate. You think, well, gee, I'll take real estate free and clear. How could I go wrong? Well, we had one tract come in that was all the neighbors had shotguns and liked to use them. And so we declined that particular gift when I was on the board. But they have expertise in some specialized areas that you might otherwise have difficulty disposing of these things without the experts that they have on their have access to. And usually that's free advice from conscientious members of the community. Yeah.
It's not unusual for us to receive an entire estate when a donor passes. Literally, they're living in their home with everything they have, and the next day they're gone, and everything comes to us, and we have the ability to be able to handle the estate sales, the sales of all the real estate, converting stocks, bonds, and as Doug said, we've even done complex gifts like oil and gas leases. So.
About donor-advised funds, anybody have experience there they'd like to share, some of the advantages or some of the challenges that maybe we should keep in mind? Or Vickie, do you have any anecdotal stories about donor-advised funds and some of the do's and don'ts and setting those up?
Wow, that's a tough question. I guess what I would like to mention is that when clients come in and indicate that they want to start some type of planning program for their family and they're interested in philanthropy, I always start the discussion about a donor-advised fund. We start because of the fact that the donor-advised fund, you get a larger income tax deduction, you have the vetting process, it's more private. But when the clients start asking questions like, do we continue to own the assets? No, you don't. You don't own it in a private foundation, but you get to make the ultimate decision. With a donor-advised fund, Randy is going to follow your suggestions, because if he didn't, it would be very bad for business. But technically, the clients can't mandate that Randy appoints the family members to the scholarship fund, or that Randy makes the distributions to particular charities. And for some clients, particularly business owners who have, on their own, built up a very successful business, the idea of giving up that control can be very difficult. And that's when we start talking more about the private foundation. It's not driven by the size of the amount that they're contributing. It's really driven by whether or not they're comfortable with the fees, whether or not they're comfortable with not having their financial advisor invest the funds, whether or not they're comfortable with making sure that the donations to the charities will be absolutely to the charities that they've selected. And the majority of the people end up going with a donor-advised fund, but there are some people who can't give up that control and are still embracing the private foundation, even though the economy has been a little more troubled and the fees are a little bit harder, and that 5% distribution is a little more difficult to make. But it's a viable option. So it's not really an anecdote, but it's just fleshing out a little bit more, I think, the difference between the two different vehicles.
Randy? Sure.
I want to go back to the lady in turquoise back there that asked, what you asked about, it caused me to think about some of the donor-advised funds we have. If you have a private foundation, as you'll see on that sheet, it's a public record. If you have a donor-advised fund with us, you can be anonymous if that's what you choose. But what I really wanted to speak to what you brought up in sorts, is that we have a number of donor-advised fund holders at the Community Foundation who choose to do all of their charitable giving through the Community Foundation. And the reason they do it is because they are solicited by so many charities. And so sometimes it takes us anywhere from 1 to 3 years to get it under control. But that first year, everybody that solicits them, they say, we do all of our charitable giving through the Albuquerque Community Foundation. Randy Royster and his staff know what our priorities are for this year. Here is his number, here is his email. Contact him. And so we play good cop, bad cop. And so they're very nice. And actually, I'm very nice when I turn them down. But they leave it to me. They leave it to me to say, you're doing wonderful work, but this is not within the priority of this donor-advised fund. And usually in a period of 1 to 3 years, what they've been able to do then is those charities start contacting us directly to say, we are interested in seeking some funding from the Yearout Family Donor-Advised Fund. Could you tell us if they're interested in this year? And that doesn't mean that we take the process over, because I might say, well, yes, I know that the family has some interest. Let me get with them. I'll get back to you. But they really use us that way so that they're not fielding all of that. I even am writing, or my staff is writing checks throughout the year for many donor-advised fund holders for their gifts to their local synagogue, their local church.
Another way to kind of deal with the stress of giving, which there is, right? There is a stress with charitable giving. If you're a business owner, I would highly suggest that you put a committee together and they do all of your giving for you as employees. So we have a community care committee that is made up of our employees. They're funded as a budget line item within our company. And basically, they do all of our corporate giving, save those instances that I mentioned earlier where things pop up that you have to deal with. And something really unique happens when you let your employees do the giving. First of all, invariably, you will get employee matches within your company where they will donate an hour or two of their time to that cause, and you provide payroll deduction to allow them to do that. So if they wanted to give $5,000 of corporate money to a charity, chances are you're going to get another $2,500 of employees jumping on board to give to that as well. The other thing it does is it really personalizes the giving within your company. It's not just Keven saying, this is who we need to give to this year, and everybody else just kind of sits back and really doesn't care about it. This is your employees deciding what your corporate mission should be, because they write the mission statement, and then them administering that. And it's very easy then when you get that phone call when you say, you know, I would like to help you, but I'm going to let you talk to Denise, because Denise does she manages our corporate giving committee, and they do all of our giving. And so it's turned out to be not only a great way to take some of the stress off of giving, but it's been a fantastic way to bring your employees into a philanthropic adventure, is kind of the way we look at it, and let them learn what it is to give and how they can give and at the corporate level.
You know, I don't know if some of you probably have high school age kids in the community. There's an activity, another organized activity, started up by Albuquerque Academy. And what they do is they have a summer program where it started with Albuquerque Academy students. It's now broadened to high schools all over the community and charter schools as well. The kids get together and they go on little trips to about a dozen charities throughout the community. And the charities make a pitch. And the school sets aside $100,000 that the kids at the end of the program have to allocate among the various ones that have pitched to them. And it's just a great exercise. And they learn how difficult it is to make these decisions. One, you know, might have a terrific emotional appeal, and another charity might cover a great deal more ground. And one is obviously run very well and very efficiently. Another one does a great thing, but not so efficiently. And they just stew and brew. And I've attended some of these discussion sessions, very illuminating. So if you've got high school age kids, you might look into the Albuquerque Community Builders Program. So Randy, how do you, you've been wrestling lately with some strategic decisions as to how much you should be diversified all over the place with charities and how much you should concentrate for impact a little bit. Maybe share some thoughts along that.
Sure. There is a pool of money that is granted into the community every year through the Community Foundation that is not through a donor advised fund. Those unrestricted dollars are, while as a donor advised fund holder you can give anywhere in the world, our unrestricted funds must be given in the greater Albuquerque metropolitan area, which is 4 counties, so it covers a large chunk of our populated state. We have really been looking over the last few years that the first few years of the Community Foundation, the boards that we had felt like, you know, let's try to support as many charities as we can. So it was 500 here and 1,000 there and 1,500 there. Over the last few years, our board has come to the place where they say, let's make sure that we're having the greatest impact with the limited dollars that we have. There are not enough dollars through funders like the Community Foundation to meet all the needs in the community. So let's take a look at who's doing the best work in all of these various fields of interest. And you'll see inside your packet on the left-hand side, there's a letter from me that talks about the different fields of interest. And so, you know, we are doing things like making $50,000 grants into the community now because we realize that with 50,000 rather than 5,000, an organization really doing outstanding work is going to be even able to meet the needs of more of the underserved in our community. And because our board is basically business folks, we're beginning to really work with businesses. And stay tuned. I think over the next year to 18 months, you may be hearing some great news of businesses who are beginning to think about taking a portion of what they give philanthropically every year and putting it into a fund to do some collaborative grant making. So that we can track it. That's another thing the Community Foundation does. We can provide you with data of what's happening with the money you're giving. And so we had a leading business in town where their CEO went back and looked at what their philanthropic giving had been over the last 10 years. And he said to me, we did a lot of really good things for a lot of good organizations. But 10 years later, the needle hasn't moved one bit in any of those areas. And what if we began taking just a portion initially and combining it with a lot of other businesses to make some significant grants into organizations that really are leading in certain areas in the community and track it for 3 years and see if the needle moves. And if it does, then we know a whole new way to start doing our philanthropic giving. So we're working with individual donors and with corporate donors, and that message resounds with national philanthropy. And so we're attracting significant dollars from out of state now. Kauffman Foundation works with us, an entrepreneurial foundation from Kansas City. We work with the Kellogg Foundation in a major way. With the MacArthur Foundation. So we need to be attracting money from out of state to help us with the things that we want to change in our state. And we think that this new type of focus towards philanthropic giving has a good chance of turning some things around.
Other comments or questions from the group? Yes, Brent.
Randy, I have another question. If you guys run across this, I'm finding that some of these family businesses.
Here comes the nuclear football.
All right. Randy, I'm finding that there's some family businesses. They have family members that they're not interested in the business. They're having trouble trying to sell the business. They don't know how to value the business. Doug referred to that earlier. But have you had any of these businesses approach you that they want to, I guess, donate the business for some kind of charitable purpose and probably create maybe somewhat of an income stream for some of the heirs? But one of the big caveats would be you have to find somebody who will manage the business for them.
Mm-hmm. So I have been at the Community Foundation's 36 years old. I last month celebrated 11 years there. And in my 11 years, one time that has come up. And as we began to work with our experts and then with the attorneys and the accountants of the family-owned business, the family decided it was getting much more difficult than they wanted to continue to pursue, and they were having to spend quite a few dollars to look at how they would do that on their end before it even came into us. So I think certainly we have the ability to look at that and see whether we can make that happen, but in 36 years, that's never happened.
May I?
Sure.
Sorry. So from that fact pattern, I would encourage the clients to look at a charitable remainder trust, because that might be a more appropriate vehicle. Yeah.
And we have charitable remainder trusts at the foundation.
Well, we're running into our witching hour, but I wanted to close. Well, first off, thank you for your active participation. It really helps make the session for all of us. But secondly, to talk just a touch about philanthropy in general. We've talked about some of the business advantages and some of the vehicles and some of the challenges and opportunities, but returning to the first statement, philanthropy truly is a unique American phenomenon. And some of you heard the story that Alexis de Tocqueville was a French journalist who came over in the early 1800s to see what's this whole new world United States thing all about. And his biggest takeaway is, my gosh, when a farmer's barn burns down, all the neighbors come along and put up a new barn for him. And it's just absolutely unknown behavior in the Europe that he had come from. And the deep personal satisfaction that comes from helping out, and the deep personal satisfaction that comes from receiving from somebody as opposed to, some bureaucracy. And I think that without philanthropy, just think how much higher your taxes would have to be to take care of all those social needs that are tended by charitable organizations. And finally, really picking up on what Keven had to say about involving the family, even down to the 8-year-old, is just so terrific. And I want to relate to you a sort of a touching family story that happened to us. When my daughter was 5, we had just come home from church, and she'd gone to her Sunday school, and we saw her just afterwards, in the early afternoon, piling all her favorite toys into a little red wagon and starting out across the backyard. We said, "Becky, what are you doing?" And she says, "I'm going to give my toys to the poor children," because she'd had this lesson in Sunday school. Well, she was on her way to our back fence neighbor, Fred and Martha Poor, and he made about twice as much as I did, but she was so committed. And I just thought to myself, that's something that's an awfully good lesson for the family and very heartening. And she has continued in that vein of giving ever since. So thank you all very much for your help. And turn it back to you, Betsy.